Good afternoon. It is Monday, the 24th of April 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, my goodness, what a tremendous weekend. The British Constitution Group event in the Albert Hall, Nottingham, was truly wonderful. Some 400 people attended, a little over 400 actually. We want to thank everybody who came. We had a very good spread of people, different backgrounds, different areas of the country, different interests, and of course the common theme running through everybody there was really the state of the nation, and indeed somebody has already commented on that in our chat box today. So a really amazing event. People were there because they know something is badly wrong in UK. They also know none of the political parties can be trusted to rectify the situation, and people there discussed the need to reassert the rule of law in UK, and of course a key part of that is to get common law operating again and to give juries their full power. It was a really good day, Mike.
Fantastic, and a number of people said to me, it's amazing how people from different ends of the political spectrum are getting together to deal with a central issue here.
Yes.
So, I mean, I suppose all we could do is say to people that were there, don't sit back, get that phone ringing and make sure that Justin is held to account for all his promises as well.
Indeed. So thank you very much for all the pledges of a monthly donation to the British Constitution Group. This is really key because we want to expand the work that we're doing. And we know that this forthcoming election is an absolutely prime time to be taking the battle straight to the politicians and, of course, to their local political associations. These are key people. But what is the main weapon for people? Well, of course, it's truth and evidence about what's really going on in this country. So what do we say? The fight back has definitely started, and it's going to be really interesting to see now what groups of people are doing in areas right the way across the country.
Right, so we'll begin with the Telegraph today. Revealed, they claim, how Britain's former Syria ambassador appeared on BBC to defend Assad after quietly taking a job with the dictator's father-in-law. So this headline, an absolute disgrace, because of course it implies he took a job and was therefore being paid for saying what he said. This is completely untrue. They say a former British ambassador to Syria who appeared on the BBC to defend the Assad regime had already become a director of a lobby group run by the dictator's father-in-law. Peter Ford, 59, courted controversy this month by claiming that President Bashar Assad would not have carried out the chemical gas attack on his own people. Now the Telegraph can reveal that just weeks before the April 4th attack, Mr. Ford had become a director of the controversial British Syrian Society. This was founded by a London-based cardiologist whose daughter happens to be married to President Assad, they claim. Well, of course, he is a director of the British Syrian Society. And what is the purpose of the British Society? It's a non-profit organisation which is there to try and improve relations between the United Kingdom and Syria. It certainly was, or at least Assad's father-in-law did help to set it up. But it is a group of people who, like Ford, believe that the disgraceful mainstream media in this country are not telling the truth about Syria. And so the Telegraph absolutely demonstrating that with this headline.
I think this is an extremely interesting event, Mike, because we've got the Telegraph coming to the support of the BBC. So here we see the united front across UK mainstream media. The Telegraph has got to join in with the BBC to crush any free speech, anybody who dares disagree with the government's line on what's happening in Syria at the moment. Well, the Telegraph is going to be on the case. And I'm going to add that tomorrow I'll be talking about the Telegraph's efforts to attack again the abuse whistleblower Darren, I think it's been absolutely fascinating to see the Telegraph leap back in. This is to close down the subject of child abuse, the engine of British politics. I think there's an air of desperation coming in here, Mike, which is producing these sort of very trashy, brash articles, but all about closing down free speech in UK.
Well, if you're watching the live stream on the UK Column website, then we're going to show our episode of Insight once again that we recorded with Peter Ford last Wednesday with Alex Thompson asking the questions.
Yep.
So we're going to show that immediately after this program.
And can we also say we understand we are getting viewers from inside Syria. So if you're watching today's UK Column, thank you very much for joining us. And we will say very clearly that we certainly do not believe the official British government line over what's happening in Syria. We believe that it's been the British government that has been behind the funding and the fomenting of terrorism. And of course, we certainly don't believe the government's line on who has been using chemicals to produce chemical type weapon effects. Are we likely to see any proper investigation into that? Certainly not while the existing British government is in power.
Let's move on to France. Obviously, the election yesterday, the results known, and well, these are the two candidates for the final runoff. We've got Emmanuel Macron on the left and Marine Le Pen on the right. Macron, of course, 39, relatively young, being presented as a centrist, is how they describe it, a centrist candidate. It's, the word is out, so they're all admitting now that he is an ex-Rothschild banker. Even the BBC is saying that people who look like they're anti-establishment turn out sometimes to be absolutely right in the heart of the establishment, and that's what Macron is. We'll talk more about this subject on Wednesday with Alex Thompson. Now, he received 23.43% of the vote. Le Pen received 22.27% of the vote, so they each took the largest vote, and so they are the final two. There's the mainstream media saying that the result was broadly in line with early projections. A sharp repudiation of establishment parties is what they're describing it as. But of course, although Macron's party is new, it absolutely is establishment at the end of the day.
Indeed. And perhaps this is a good place to bring in that we had a gentleman who'd come all the way from France for the British Constitution Group event on Saturday. And when we said, well, why have you come and how did you find out about this? Well, it started by him watching the UK Column and realising that what we were talking about, the deep state, in particular, the use of applied behavioural psychology. We mentioned Mr.
Oliver Willier.
Yes, thank you. Oliver Willier, who was the Frenchman working in Sarkozy's private office that was helping David Cameron and the Behavioural Insights team introduce this political applied psychology to change the way we think and behave. So how remarkable that the UK Column message getting through into France, and then people in France picking up that what we're talking about also happening in France itself. Excellent.
Yep.
Well, let's bring in this lady. I could not resist this over the last couple of days because a couple of truly remarkable photographs of Theresa May, the British Prime Minister. I look at the eyes and the expression on this lady's face. I see genuine cruelty.
But she's not looking terribly well, Brian.
She's looking a bit peaky. I think this is because they've turned up the burner now that she's there as Prime Minister, the real pressure. The men in the shadows will be pulling her strings. Blackmail could be, I don't know. But we're certainly starting to see her look incredibly haggard and tired. But in principle, that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at her eyes. So MSN says here, Sterling tanks as Downing Street announces surprise. Well, what is the surprise? The surprise is that she wants to be re-elected with even more power to install the police state and to, of course, imprison whistleblowers, because this is what this lady specialises in. So make up your own mind of these photographs, but I think we can really see that this woman is love, compassion. Don't really see those there, Mike.
Maybe she's not getting enough time in Scotland or something.
She's not getting enough relaxation. She needs something to take her mind off the stress of the work. A toy boy would work well. But what have we got here? Well, this is another classic picture. I believe it's from The Independent. It was sent to me on Saturday or Sunday. What a telling picture. This is fear, isn't it? Because we've got the British Prime Minister flanked by police persons. And this is clearly because she's worried. Obviously, she's going to be attacked or something. But we need to zoom in on the eyes. If you look at a good digital copy of this picture and you zoom in on her eyes, it is absolutely stunning. I think this is one of the most dangerous prime ministers we've had, and the thought of her with a greater majority in Westminster is a truly scary thing. We need to stop this.
Well, let's speak of scary things with dodgy eyes, because look away now if you're of a weak disposition. Let's get Tony Blair back on screen, because of course he's been speaking out over the weekend. He's concerned that Theresa May win a landslide, and he's concerned that that would give the Conservatives a mandate for Brexit at any cost. And he said that the absolute central question at this general election is less who is the Prime Minister on the 9th of June, and more what is the nature of the mandate in particular, because otherwise, frankly, this is a steamroller election. Otherwise, it is possible we can return as many members of Parliament as possible that are going to keep an open mind on this Brexit negotiation until we see the final terms. What I'm advocating may mean that. It may mean voting Labour. It may mean, by the way, that they vote Tory for candidates who are prepared to give a commitment against Brexit. So he finished off by saying, I just feel that we're allowing ourselves to be hijacked by what is actually quite a small group of people with a very strong ideology. The hypocrisy here is incredible. But he said, far be it from me to suggest that Tony Blair would lie about anything, but he said, I'm not going to advocate people vote tactically. What I'm saying is that they should vote on an informed basis on the issue. So, in other words, he is saying that they should vote tactically. So
and they're only informed if they actually vote the way that he thinks they should vote. Because if you vote any other way, 17 million people voted that there should be one way. Tony Blair disagrees, so bring them back into the fold. Except they're not confident enough to think if they just ran a second referendum, they could win it. This is interesting. Different. So we've got a snap election in order to drift things.
Absolutely. And the fallout in terms of legislation starting to hit now. So apparently we're not going to get the opportunity, as I'm sure we were all looking forward to, we're not going to get the opportunity to plead guilty online, at least not immediately. This is the Prisons and Courts Bill, which is one of the bills which has been dropped as a result of the fact that Parliament is going to be dissolved on May the 3rd. So they're trying to focus on the really key issues to get through before that May the 3rd deadline, because Parliament has to be dissolved 25 days before the election date. And so the relevant select committee said that basically there wasn't time to get this through. I suspect, as you suggested earlier to me, Brian, that this is a subject they don't want to be discussing during the election time.
Too controversial, too close to the truth, reveals too much about the future plans. So they want to get the election out the way, and then they can carry on pushing all of these draconian police state policies through. That's the objective, I think, anyway.
Well, Boris Johnson has appointed, he says, 2 new independent governors of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. Now, many people may not know what that is, so we're just going to give a little bit of an explanation of what the Westminster Foundation for Democracy is, and who these 2 new governors are, and what the implications of this are. So the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, it's got a lot of purple on its website, a particular hue of purple. Anybody that knows anything about common purpose may well recognise that colour. We'll come on to that in a second. But the Westminster Foundation for Democracy was established in 1992. It's an arm's length. We discussed this last week, what an arm's length non-government, non-departmental public body is. So it's an arm's length non-departmental public body. It's run independently independently from the UK government, they say, although it works closely with the UK government. And the Foundation's vision is the establishment of legitimate and effective multi-party representative democracy. Okay, so keep that in mind. They claim, this is a complete lie, because they claim that their vision is the establishment of a legitimate and effective multi-party representative democracy. Now, of course, that is their vision, so that part of it's not a lie, but in fact, what they seem to be doing is working towards a common purpose-inspired system of third sector participatory democracy and not representative democracy at all, and we're going to show that in a second. Right, so let's have a look and see who these two new people are. Well, here's the first person.
He's appointed these people.
He has appointed these people, yes.
But it's independent.
It's independent, but the government has appointed these people.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes, okay. Well, the first guy is Thomas Hughes, and he has been, up until this point, the executive director at an organisation called Article 19. And so we'll talk about Article 19 in a second. What else has he done? Well, he was a director and board member of Media Frontiers, which was a social purpose enterprise working with online independent news media publishers worldwide to assist them in becoming financially sustainable. So you'll understand why that's important when we come on to the second individual. But basically what he then was doing was promoting smaller media outlets in other countries. So this is soft power work again here, Brian. And who else does he work for? Well, he was Press and Information Officer at the European Commission. He was a project officer at the International Rescue Committee, where David Miliband is in charge now. And he was a researcher for the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. So this is an independent individual.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's have a look and see how independent he was with regard to Article 19. So this is Article 19. Well, you can see from the top headline there on that page, Russia online dissent sparks mass protest. He is in there driving this dissent and these mass protests. So this is how independent he is, but he wants to create representative democracy everywhere.
Of a particular model.
Of a particular model, yes. That's his claim, not ours. Yeah. So let's look at who's funding Article 19. Who have we got here? Department for International Development, Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Commission, Ford Foundation, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, Fritt Ord, Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Open Society Institute. So it's absolutely clear what this lot are about. But this guy is an independent governor of this independent organisation, arm's length organisation, which is there to promote representative democracy in this country and overseas.
And appointed by Boris Johnson.
Appointed by Boris Johnson. So totally independent. Here is the other governor, Sue English. And well, she was, up until 2015, head of political programmes at the BBC. And after she left her job as head of political programmes at the BBC, she spent the rest of her time at the BBC working for BBC Media Action. What do they do in foreign countries, Brian?
Arm's length, independent charity, and we know their job is subversion. So getting the programming, Kazakhstan, key example, where the television programming was used to help undermine the existing social structure.
So Boris Johnson has appointed two new governors of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, who are both experienced with managing change in other countries through subversive media. That's how it looks to me.
Well, this is absolutely what's happening. And of course, we're going to say all credit to the Russians, because the Russians bowled this stuff out. They saw it happening in Russia. And it was President Putin that took the action to start to remove these pernicious arm's length non-governmental organisations from Russian society. Where are many of them headquartered? Here. Right.
Well, so let's just take a slightly different direction here with this organisation and mention Sir Michael Aronson, who was, a governor of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy from 2001 to 2007. Let's get him on screen. There he is. Now, during this period that he was a governor of the Westminster Foundation, he was also a civil service commissioner. So many people don't know what the Civil Service Commission is. The Civil Service Commission regulates recruitment to the civil service, Brian. So the Civil Service Commission regulates recruitment to the civil service. What does that mean if you have somebody with a vested interest as a civil service commissioner?
Well, the likelihood is that they are going to influence the recruiting to meet their own agenda or the agenda of others with whom they're associating.
That's how I would read it too. So the Civil Service Commission regulates recruitment of the civil service, providing assurance that the appointments are on merit after fair and open competition. It also helps promote the civil service values of honesty, integrity, objectivity and impartiality, and hears complaints under the Civil Service Code. The Commission is independent of government and the civil service.
Right.
Okay, so let's have a look. There we go. There's the annual report from the Civil Service Commission, and there is Mr. Aronson up in the top right-hand corner there. But let's look at who else he was sitting alongside. And so here are the two main commissioners, Janet Perskova,
I think it is,
sorry,
yeah.
and Sir David Bell. Two of the top people in Common Purpose.
Yeah.
So here we are in 2006, 2007, and we have Common Purpose infiltration right into the civil service and Common Purpose infiltration right into the Westminster Foundation for Democracy.
Yeah.
Right? So during this period then, we find that people involved with all these groups were also involved with the Club of Madrid. And they were attending, in this case, a conference on stopping violent extremism, they said. Well, who was involved in that? We had Rushanara Ali, who is a board member for the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. We had Alison Coburn, co-founder and deputy chief executive of Common Purpose International. Note that name, Alison Coburn. And Elizabeth Dixon, chief executive of Common Purpose South Africa, for example, taking part in that. But let's remember, of course, that it is the Club de Madrid which is pushing for whose policy it is that Theresa May is pushing forward in this country. And if Theresa May becomes re-elected as Prime Minister, she will be pushing the Shared Societies project once again.
And this is the key thing which we can now keep pushing, is that, of course, what Theresa May wants is a much stronger majority so that she doesn't have to bother at all. There's no debate in Westminster really anyway, but she's going to be able to just push it through. Okay,
so are we seeing so far a picture which amounts to the promotion of representative democracy? I don't think so. So let's just put the final nail in the coffin here, because here is the Common Purpose International website from that period in time, 2008. I think this snapshot is from January 2008. And there's Alison Coburn, who's the main contact for Common Purpose International at that time. And if we scroll down the page, what do we find as we head down the bottom here? We are particularly grateful to the following supporters: Vodafone, Financial Times, Department for International Development, Westminster Foundation for Democracy. So Westminster Foundation for Democracy, not only swapping personnel with Common Purpose, but actually funding Common Purpose. Westminster Foundation for Democracy, not only swapping personnel with the Civil Service Commission and putting their people into the civil service, but Common Purpose as well, putting their people into the civil service. And of course, alongside that, at the same time, where the Common Purpose, the contracts to Common Purpose to change the minds of the top 200 civil servants and change their ways of working, change their ways of thinking.
And minutes of the meeting where that discussion took place were falsified in order to mislead the public.
And Boris Johnson has now appointed 2 more excellent people to that organisation.
Independent organisation.
Totally independent. We're being slightly sarcastic here, with exactly the tools that they need to promote representative democracy in Britain and abroad.
So what we're watching is subversion. This is political subversion, but talk about leaving the EU as if the EU is something that exists the other side of the English Channel. This is not the case at all. What we've got is this structure buried in the heart of the British government. And of course, we've got complete treason from our own members of Parliament, because they are promoting this agenda and facilitating this agenda whilst lying to the general public. If we come in at a different angle, we'll switch over to education. And here's the Star. And what's it talking about? South Yorkshire teacher banned over romp with schoolgirl on prom night. Now, this headline is grossly misleading because it's a little bit of slap and tickle. This is all it is. And, well, it's a teacher, but is there really a problem? Well, there is a problem because the teacher is a 45-year-old and is also a lady, but she specifically befriended a very vulnerable pupil who was living in sheltered accommodation. And this wasn't a one-night romp. This was grooming the girl and then getting her to engage in sexual activity, where she, on one occasion, brought in an unnamed man to participate. So we have a school teacher who was able to get a mobile phone number by using data held by the school database, and then she uses it to groom a girl to have sexual relations with that girl. And this wasn't a one-night stand because this went on over some 2 years. And she's only finally been struck off because this surfaced. Now, why are we interested in this? Well, because if we start to have a look at the school concerned, we find that this study was conducted at the school, and this was actually carried out by the Education Development Trust. So can we prove what we say? Well, this is acknowledgements, and in it here is Danham Academy, South Yorkshire. So this is the one where the standards are so high that a female teacher can use school data to select and groom a vulnerable young girl. So what sort of practices have been carried out in the school? Well, here we are. The Education Development Trust, established over 40 years ago as the Centre for British Teaching, is a large educational organisation providing educational services for the public benefit. And what do they want to be? We aspire to be the world's leading provider of education services, not just Yorkshire. They are going to run the world's education system. And this is pretty scary stuff, but look at where they're going. Internationally, we have successfully implemented education programs for governments in the Middle East. That's all democracy, I understand, Mike. Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and work on projects funded by donors such as the Department for International Development. There we are back in the thing. The European Commission, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs, the World Bank, and the US Agency for International Development. So who are these people to be working inside a school? And this is what the study was about, investigating the notion of inspiring teaching. Well, this female teacher was certainly inspired because she was so inspired she was off grooming a young girl. The point we want to make is everywhere we now look within what should be discrete public services within UK, we're finding these world government organisation, huge amounts of money, running their own training agenda.
And they're getting that money from the Department for International Development.
And they're getting that money either directly from the British government or from vast overseas banks such as the World Bank or the European Union. So this is embedded, and we'll also add, we're not bringing it up on screen, but the evidence is there that Common Purpose has also been at work in that Yorkshire school. So Common Purpose itself involved with paedophiles, and two very dangerous paedophiles who were connected with Common Purpose, of course, in prison. So subversion at the very heart of government and, of course, our public services.
Okay, let's just remind everybody again that Vaxxed, there's going to be a public screening of Vaxxed once again in West London on Thursday this week, 27th of April, between 7 p.m, 10 p.m. The venue will be confirmed on the day. If you want to find out more and keep up to date with this, get onto the Bring Vaxxed to the UK Facebook page.
Okay.
What's next?
Well, into the police, and thank you very much for the person who sent us this article. I think it was a lady called Jean. So Jean, thank you very much. We've got the Daily Record, and they're reporting on a police officer, Constable Robert Brown. He's launched a legal bid to publicly name and shame colleagues he claims are corrupt, and he wants to use legal protection as a whistleblower to make complaints about his own force and their practices. And he plans to make 5 separate public interest disclosures alleging criminality and cover-ups by officers from the former Strathclyde Police, Police Scotland and their former counter-corruption unit. So this is extremely interesting that we had a policeman who was trying to bring all of this to the fore. And what has happened? Well, of course, Police Scotland is putting the screws on him. They do not want him to speak out. The Police Scotland had asked the tribunal to strike the case out and refuse any further hearing. So we've got a classic example of nasty stuff at work, and the focus is Strathclyde Police, who of course have now been absorbed into the single Scottish police force, Police Scotland. Well, we have been aware of this case for quite a long time, but thank you again to the person who highlighted it to us. I encourage you to go and look at this very poignant, very short, sharp video clip about a man who the video says was murdered.
So the title is just "This Man Was Murdered."
This man was murdered. It was uploaded on October the 5th, 2009, and it's about Andy McArdle. They say was a very brave man, completely sane, but he was blowing the whistle on drug smuggling by Strathclyde Police. And what happened to him? They put him in Berlini prison, which is apparently a very, very thuggish prison in Scotland. And then they put him into mental hospital, where he was forcibly medicated on psychotropic drugs. And then he dies with a variety of injuries, but doctors said, well, actually, it was a heart attack. So we've got a policeman speaking out about corruption in Strathclyde Police. Police Scotland are trying to close that down. We have brought your attention to the death of Andy McArdle, and basically we encourage you to go and have a look at that, research the information on the internet, because the trail is again dangerous corruption and drugs within Strathclyde Police. But not to worry, independence is the key word, Mike. And what we need is some independent body to investigate what the Scottish Police might be doing wrong. So we're going to bring in this organisation, which is the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner Scotland. Now, I'm pleased to say it is independent. We know this because it says so. Independent and effective investigations and reviews. It says, are they independent of the police? Yes. It's an independent organisation. So
they seem to be protesting quite a lot.
They are. All of our viewers and listeners should be happy that we're looking at an independent organisation. So we get into the meat. The post of the Police Investigations and Review Commissioner is a ministerial appointment. So I'm now struggling a bit because it's independent but really not of government.
No.
No. Okay. Well, if you're a bit confused, we're bringing a bit more. Scotland has a single police service, and therefore where an independent investigation is required, the Crown can direct PIRC as an independent body to undertake and report on its behalf. So it's not independent at all. It's simply part of the Crown, and it can be directed in any direction they want to direct them.
So the Crown has, at least the Scottish Parliament has responsibility or accountability for the police. The Scottish Government Parliament appoints the investigators and the Review Commissioner, and the Crown pays for PIRC to do its work.
Yes.
And the Crown also pays for the police.
Yes.
And so where is the independence here?
There isn't any. There is no independence at all. So let's have a look at this from another direction. This was 2013 in the UK column warning of the police state coming in Scotland. And of course, originally there had been 8 separate police districts in Scotland with 8 chief constables. At the time, a gentleman called Kenny McCaskill was top of the pyramid as the Justice Secretary. Thank you, Mike. But at least you had different police districts, so perhaps if one was showing signs of corruption, another one could investigate. So what did they do? Well, they transformed it into one single police force under Mr. Stephen House, and therefore the state completely controlled the police as well. And we said at the time the characteristics of a dictatorship: power concentrated in the hands of a few who are unaccountable. And we also said who investigates and polices the police? Well, apparently now the state in Scotland independently polices itself, policing the police.
Excellent.
It's good, isn't it? But it gets better, because if we have a look at this organisation, we can see that the lady at the top, Kate Frayne, the commissioner, well, she was part of the Procurator Fiscal's office itself, so she has worked at the heart of the government. She simply steps across, becomes independent.
Well, that's even better.
Yeah.
So she's appointed to the Procurator Fiscal's office, and then she's appointed to this organisation.
Yeah, but she becomes independent as this happens,
Right.
You understand, Mike? And let's bring in another man, because this one, he gets even better. We've got John Mitchell, Director of Operations. Well, a former detective chief superintendent and head of CID at Strathclyde Police.
So he's just just cut all his ties. He has no friends at Strathclyde Police anymore. He's completely independent.
He has become independent because he's been appointed independently to an independent organisation, and therefore you become independent. I hope viewers overseas can stay with us as we use a little bit of black humour to describe this utter nonsense. We're looking at a dictatorship. So if you're not happy with that, let's bring in another one. We've gone John McSporran. I wouldn't have believed that was a real name. John McSporran, Head of Investigations. And let's have a look at his background. He was Detective Superintendent in charge of the major investigations team at Strathclyde Police.
Fantastic.
But he's independent. And let's bring in the last person we need to remind people, because here's former Procurator Fiscal herself, Eilish Angelini, the lady that, of course, helped along the cover-up of the abuse of Holly Gregg. Robert Greene had a terrible time in prison. And as part of her Operation Planet, she made it easier, effectively, for men to abuse boys in Scotland.
Yeah.
That was done under her maiden name, not under her name, Eilish Angelini. So you couldn't make this up. We didn't have to, because this is factual information. We're saying there is no separation of powers in Scotland. There is no independent investigation into crimes carried out by the police. And we've got a classic case where, when a police officer steps forward bravely to tell the truth about what's going on, he's faced with a wall of linked and collaborating state organisations. I think I often say East Germany would be proud of this. We know that one or two German viewers get upset. We're not pointing the finger at German society. We're pointing the finger at that particular regime. I think the East German Stasi would have loved to have had this ruthless system with this very thin veneer of the respectability of British democracy.
Yeah. Just before you move on, somebody asked in the chat box, can't remember who it was now, the names of the two common purpose linked paedophiles. James Rennie was one, Matthew Byrne was the other. And Matthew Byrne, of course, we have published the photograph a couple of times of him hugging David Cameron. It's not quite a hug, but it certainly had his arm around him.
Yeah, standing adjacent to David Cameron, who was awarding him with a medal. But if you Google Matthew Byrne, who was on the advisory board of Common Purpose, read the detail of his crimes yourself. Utterly, utterly disgusting. And then, of course, we had James Rennie, who, with a group of, I think it was 8 men, were abusing children as young as a few months old. Common purpose, selected leaders of society. Well, let's bring in another one, David Cameron himself. And we just want to remind people that, of course, David Cameron was helping to nudge the British public to thinking that GCHQ and the intelligence services were there to protect society and root out the paedophiles. So they were getting into the dark net. But what's really been happening, of course, is that we've seen no proper investigation by the security services or indeed GCHQ. So pretty pretty heavy stuff. And I'll just bring in this one. Reminds people that it was the same David Cameron that was defending Leon Britton, what an upstanding member of society. And he was keen to buy off, of course, any abuse survivors. Let's give them cash. Let's give them a few £1,000 and they can go away. So as the election approaches, we think it's important to remind people what the Conservatives have really been up to. And Francis Maude, who has been one of the lead senior Tories behind the use of applied behavioural psychology to change the way we think, this man has stitched together an amazing network of British intelligence and security services, including GCHQ, as you can see top left, but he has linked them in with a whole range of Israeli intelligence agencies and sub-agencies. Now, this was not debated in Westminster. There's never been any explanation as to why Britain's intelligence services have now been so closely entwined with those of Israel. But presumably, if you vote Conservative, you are really voting Israel. If anybody disagrees with what I've just said or can explain to me when and where the debate was in Westminster to lock us into the Israeli system, I'd appreciate the debate. And I'm going to bring in one of Plymouth's Conservative MPs. Hard to forget him. This is the man who thinks that hedgehogs are the key part of the debate in Britain at the moment. And I just wanted to remind people that we asked this man for him to provide the evidence which meant that Britain could simply use drones to kill people in foreign countries. This was going back a good few months now. And we said, you said it was right to kill these people using drones. Can you provide the evidence that they were guilty? And of course, no evidence ever came back. So this is the standard of our British politicians.
Well, let's get another one of our British politicians on screen, Michael Fallon, because of course he was complaining bitterly today about Jeremy Corbyn's comments yesterday regarding the nuclear deterrent. He said that Jeremy Corbyn would put the security of this country at risk immediately he was elected. He said, I, on the other hand, am putting the security of this country at risk right now. It's true, by the time Corbyn becomes Prime Minister, our nuclear deterrent will be in the hands of the French. Now, of course, he didn't actually say those last two quotes because that's just a little bit of fake news. I just felt like pushing in there. But this is the point. The point is that Michael Fallon is handing away British military, as we've said time and time again, to an integrated European, unified European system. And he's doing that now. He's not doing it at some point in the future. The Parliament is not yet dissolved, so he's still in his job. He is doing that today. And for him to stand there or sit there and criticise Jeremy Corbyn for his long-held views on the nuclear deterrent is unbelievably hypocritical.
Well, it's obscene, it's outrageous, and this is the style of the duplicitous British politicians today. If they're prepared to lie to the British public about one matter, they're going to lie on anything they choose. And of course, it therefore makes sense that they're prepared to utterly lie over the situation in Iraq or Syria or Libya or the Yemen in order to push their policy forward. But the thing I'd like people to remember is, what is this man's expertise? Well, he is an expert in nurseries for very young children. That's his background. He now becomes an expert apparently in defence and nuclear weapons. I don't think so. I think this man has been very carefully chosen in order to carry out the bidding of people much deeper into the shadow element of the British government.
Now, of course, I've just made some assertions about Michael Fallon. If you want to see some evidence to back those up, get onto the UK Column website, get a look at the the EU military unification page. There's a timeline there showing the timeline of EU military unification, and there are links to a bunch of articles at the bottom which provide the evidence for what I've just said. Now, please, if you haven't seen this before, go and look at it. and more importantly, share it, and even more importantly, print it out and use it to challenge MPs at the hustings and at every other opportunity. Now, something else that Fallon said then was that he said, I thought it was staggeringly irresponsible. He, Corbyn, was refusing to support RAF strikes against terrorists. He is now questioning the nuclear deterrent, and he seems to be at odds with his own party there. That's chaotic, and he's not going to get any kind of grip on immigration. I'm not quite sure how he conflates the two, but anyway, I just wanted to highlight this point. Staggeringly irresponsible. He has refused to support RAF strikes against terrorists. What RAF strikes against terrorists? There aren't any, because we are supporting the terrorists. And I'm just going to remind everybody about Friday's UK column news. I separated out the section from the discussion that I had with Vanessa Beeley about the Aleppo bus bombing into a separate video. The link is at the top there. Please share this as much as possible. It's had about 7,000 views or something since I posted it. This is just a short, I think 10-minute segment out of Friday's news. Please distribute it far and wide. The other thing that Fallon said, by the way, is in the most extreme circumstances, we've made it very clear that you can't rule out the use of nuclear weapons as a first strike. And he said on what circumstances, he was asked what circumstances they would use nuclear weapons as a first strike. He said better not to specify or describe those. And he said the whole point about the deterrent is that you've got to leave uncertainty in the mind of anyone who might be thinking of using weapons against this country. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I thought two things. First of all, that the nuclear deterrent there was to deter, so it wasn't intended to be used as a first strike. It was there to stop somebody else using their weapons as a first strike. And I thought that the second point is that the deterrent that you had was there to absolutely leave no uncertainty about that. Yeah. So any suggestion here that he is saying that you've got to leave uncertainty in the mind of anyone else. Is this man on the same planet? Is he taking drugs? What is his problem?
He is. I think he's heavily reframed, Mike. I think he's really being seriously controlled by other people to get this geopolitical agenda through. Anybody talking about the first use of nuclear weapons is going into immensely dangerous territory. What would the Russians be thinking, hearing a British politician talking about the first use of nuclear weapons? They would be saying that Britain, utterly dangerous government, which of course is correct. Right, we better end there, I think.
Yes.
Okay, that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'll say once again, thank you so much to all the 400 plus people that came to the British Constitution Group in Nottingham. It was wonderful to see you all there. There's a lot of work to be done on the follow-up, but of course the key is for people to get up, get active, get putting the truth and the evidence in front of these duplicitous parliamentary candidates for this next election. It's up to us. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.